Boston was my first port of entry in this country many, many years ago when I came here as a graduate student. New York City, as a planner, is perhaps the premier city where you want to work. There is nothing like it. Most people think of New York as, Midtown Manhattan with high rises and tall buildings. But New York really is a city of boroughs. My intention was to come here and learn more about housing, really, and how architecture and planning play a role in the built form where people create their own housing.
Welcome to Indian News. Our guest today is Purnima Kapur. Purnima, welcome to our show and thank you very much for your time.
Yeah.
So now let us start with after 25 years spending in New York City, the capital of the world, in real estate and planning and design, you decided to come to Boston at the Harvard University. What drove you to come here and how do you find Boston?
So sure. Um, so, Boston was my first port of entry in this country many, many years ago when I came here as a graduate student. So I've always had an affinity and a love for Boston. I've lived here even before I did this job. Most of my planning career I spent in New York. I started out as a fresh graduate. In fact, I went from Cambridge to New York and came right back
Back, yeah, coming home.
coming home in some ways, yes.
Mhm.
So New York City as a planner is perhaps the premier city where you want to work. There is nothing like it, in my view. The challenges, the complexity, the diversity, not just of, the geography of New York. Most people think of New York as, Midtown Manhattan with high rises and tall buildings. But New York really is a city of boroughs, 5 boroughs with distinct personalities, everything from single family homes in more suburban style to the brownstones that are well known, around the world, to mid-rise sort of 8-story apartment buildings to the high-rise context that we all know. We have 500 plus miles of waterfront in New York. It really is a coastal city, which most people don't think of it as. It is a city that over time has welcomed immigrants from every part of the world, and our neighborhoods there are reflective of that diversity. So as a planner, working in New York City was really like working across the globe,
Eh,
working through different built contexts, different communities, different issues, from affordable housing, to how to encourage economic development in downtown Brooklyn, midtown Manhattan, in the Bronx, in Queens, to redeveloping, an amusement district like Coney Island, which is unique in its own way. So it was a very fulfilling and a very amazing planning career that I had.
Excellent. Now, before we come to your role at the Harvard University, my question to you is, so you said that you came here as a graduate student to Boston. Which university did you go and what did you study?
Sure. I came to MIT as a
Uh-huh.
graduate student in their Masters of Science in Architecture Studies program. I was an architect by training at that time. I had done my Bachelor of Architecture from the School of Planning and Architecture in New Delhi. I worked there for a year, and I came to this program, which is meant for people that already have a first professional degree. I was already licensed to practice architecture in India when I came here. My intention was to come here and learn more about housing, really, and how architecture and planning play a role in the built form where people create their own housing. I came here and realized that my interests went beyond a building scale, which was already starting to build up and looking at sort of communities and how they built housing. And I ended up doing a lot of courses across sort of MIT's programs, but also Harvard Graduate School of Design, Kennedy School of Government, and ended up doing a dual degree, which was the Masters of Science in Architecture Studies, but also Masters of City Planning. And most of my career has been more in the city planning realm.
Excellent. So now let's stay a little bit about India. So you said you did your the architecture degree from Delhi. Did you grew up in Delhi or somewhere else in?
I was born and brought up in Delhi. I
Uh,
was
uh,
a Delhiite, until I became a New Yorker and now
okay.
a Cambridge resident.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in Delhi, did you go to Delhi University or LSR or?
I went to the School of Planning and Architecture. That's the name
Okay.
of it. It's deemed a university in itself. It's a school that is, at that time, certainly was the premier architecture school in India.
Sure.
And it's a 5-year architecture degree. And when you graduate, you're licensed to work not just in India, but also it's recognized by the Royal Institute of British Architects. So,
So how generally we hear a lot of people in India, always it has been the case, either you go in the administrative services or you become an engineer or doctor or something like that. What made you interested in architecture?
yeah, so I have always had an interest in the more creative side of life. I would sketch, I would draw. I was a good student, so of course my parents thought I was going to go into medicine. That's what you
Mhm.
did, right? As you
Mhm.
said,
Sure,
right?
sure, yeah.
Growing up, my dad is an engineer, and you know, I just found myself more interested in issues in fields that brought social, cultural, civic, and technical sort of fields together. It
Mhm.
was this combination of thinking about how you built, who you built for, how to, create sort of I grew up in a big city. I saw sort of how the city had grown. Delhi, famously is there are 7 cities of Delhi, and New Delhi, as it evolved post-independence, was sort of that seventh city. My family were refugees from Pakistan. They
Mhm.
came to Delhi and lived for a long time in a small 2-room apartment. They were lucky they were not in a refugee camp, you know.
Mhm.
So I have seen sort of how cities have the ability to allow people to really also, you know, reach their potential in ways that smaller places don't. And the buildings have a big role to play in how, your formative years are.
So now let's come back to the Harvard University. And what is your and Harvard University today also they are developing these new research centers and so
Mhm.
much stuff going on. And so tell us about your role at Harvard and what are some of the things we're working on right now.
Sure. So, what made Harvard attractive to me once I had sort of reached where I was really going to reach in New York City in terms of my trajectory was this exact combination that you're talking about, right? So there is a university that is 380 some years old, right? The oldest university. It actually predates the city of Cambridge, um, right? Which has grown over 400 years in this almost organic form and is sort of iconic in its own right and in its own way. But then in the 21st century, we have all of this property in Allston now, which is really, if we are to grow more, that's sort of an opportunity to think about growth in a different way.
Mhm.
And it is really that combination of the campus and the city building aspect of this job that attracted me to Harvard to begin with. What I, my portfolio includes all of our campuses. So Cambridge, Allston, Longwood, and our properties that go beyond, greater Boston area. And like the Arboretum is part of Harvard's portfolio. In Allston, we have a combination of our own campus. The business school is there, athletics is there. Recently, School of Science and Engineering opened its new building there on Western Avenue. And then we have this land that, at least in the near future, is not necessarily needed for campus expansion, but it gives Harvard an opportunity to bring its mission and its goals into creating opportunities for furthering science and research while also building a community that is livable, that provides opportunities for recreation, that provides opportunities for culture, that really sort of works with the existing Allston community to create a neighborhood that can be for our community, for the greater Allston Brighton community, and for the Boston region as a whole. And
So what is, Purnima, your core value in planning these communities or design? What really drives you from that aspect?
I think that, people think of planning and architecture as being about buildings. It really is about people. It is about who will occupy that buildings, who will live in this city, and how. How do we want to interact with each other? Any significant urban center requires communal thinking, communal living. We share amenities, right? Unlike a suburban home where you have your driveway and you have a backyard where your kids will play and you'll park your car, and live sort of and drive to whatever you need to go get. Urban settings require people to really be the social beings that we are, right? So
Sure.
in every city setting, your front yard is not just like it's the sidewalk is becomes your front yard. You are walking to stores. Your parks become the play areas for your kids, right? So that really is what is to me closest to how I grew up in India, right? And it's always been that fascination with how cities have grown across the globe. If you notice, they all have these common elements, place squares, plazas, chowks in India, right?
Mhm.
Where people come together, the
Mhm.
courtyards, the chabara, right? It's not that different. It gets expressed in different languages as the context is different, the climate is different, the people who interact with each other might be different, but we are all human beings. And that to me is what architecture and planning is about.
So when you came here as a graduate student, and you saw the MIT, you saw the Harvard, you saw the beautiful Charles River and all this stuff, did you ever think that you'll be coming back here and doing what you were doing today?
Yeah, I could not. I mean, as a 20 something year old, this is not what I wasn't thinking. What am I doing, 30, 35 years later? Um, I don't think that at that time in my career, I was still learning, I was absorbing. And in some ways, my career has taken me through journeys that I may not ever have planned or thought about. And, I have let that journey guide me in some ways. I did not come with like a plan of 5 years from now, this is where I want to be. I thought initially when I graduated, my interest was more in international development, right? I thought I'd work for, I don't know, one of the groups that does, I was studying squatter settlements in Latin America. I had studied that in India, and I thought that was sort of my interest in housing. I ended up in New York in local government doing local planning, and that really opened my eyes to sort of how a community can play a role in shaping its own future working with the city. And my career took a different turn from there. And then I've stayed sort of more with that kind of community-based planning. And in some ways, what we do at Harvard, our communities may be different. So my communities here are the schools themselves, right? The students, the people that are at Harvard, and our host communities, the cities of Cambridge and Allston and Longwood, or wherever we are doing this work. But that fundamental dynamic remains the same. I think that we are in a very good place overall from, now compared to when I started my career in planning, in that there is a lot of awareness about, how mass transit can really help us in ameliorating some of the damage that, unchecked uses of cars have done over the last 50, 70 years
Sure.
across the globe, not just in this country. Awareness about climate resiliency, the need for working with nature rather than working against nature, right? We've done a lot of work to kind of try to control nature rather than to understand it and work with, which is historically, that's how cities grew, right? People understood the natural elements a lot better than we do today.